Hey guys, all right, let's continue our talk about plants. Um, we've gone through about half the chapter now. You know about the different types of tissues, a little bit about the leaves and their structure, how to tell if it's monocot or dicot. Um, so now let's talk a little bit about the stems. The whole job of the stem is to basically be the highway for the plant. They connect the leaves to the roots. This is how the bundles of xylem and phloem travel throughout the plant. There's two main parts I want you to know. You have the nodes, and this is where you have the leaves. So a node is a spot along the stem that produces leaves. The internodes is just the area between the nodes, literally in between the nodes. A bud is just a little structure that will develop into branches. So you've probably heard of a flower bud or a leaf bud. Same way with branches. There's two main types of stems. We have herbaceous stems and then woody stems. When you think herbaceous, think herbs. These are typically going to be green. The reason why is they're constructed a lot like the leaves are. What that means is they have an epidermis, they might have a few stomata, and they're going to have some cells for photosynthesis. And we know that if you have chloroplast, you have chlorophyll, you have green. So these herbaceous stems are going to be green in color. All plants will have these herbaceous stems at some point in their growth. Monocots tend to keep these herbaceous stems throughout their lives, and that's important. So a monocot tends to keep that herbaceous stem. Now, for a lot of our dicots, eventually they're going to move past that herbaceous stem growth and turn into a more woody stem. And so a stem is going to have two types of growth. And the two types of growth you're going to see in a stem is going to be primary and secondary. And you need to know the difference between these two. So primary growth is going to be a growth, an increase in length. Primary growth is the upward growth. And so you see that within the herbaceous stems, you see them undergoing this primary growth, getting taller. And then at some point, if you're a dicot, you move past that primary growth. You enter into the stage where you develop into a woody stem, and you're going to have what's called secondary growth. And then secondary growth is going to be an increase in diameter or an increase, they're going to grow outward. And we say the same thing about kids. A lot of times we say that kids kind of go through phases. They grow up and then they grow out. They grow taller and then they kind of grow out and they grow taller and they grow out. And then at some point, you're going to become an adult. You stop growing up and then you start, it's the battle of the bulge. You start fighting that secondary growth of growing outwards, if you know what I mean. So primary and secondary growth, you need to know the difference between those. So woody dicot stem, here's what I want you to know. First of all, you have this part of the stem called the cork cambium. Here's what I want you to know about that. The cork cambium, guess what it produces? It produces cork. And this cambium, that's kind of a weird word. So cambium is a type of meristematic tissue. I'm going to abbreviate there. But you need to know that. Cambium is a meristematic tissue. And so the cork cambium specifically is going to produce cork. Those cork cells will protect and support the stem. The next thing I really want you to know about this guy is, I don't care about cortex. I want you to know about the lenticels. So the lenticels are going to be found in the surface of a woody stem. And basically, they are tiny pores. Pore is just a fancy word for hole. Lenticels are these little holes in the stem that allow for gas exchange. Kind of like the stomata in our leaves allow for gas exchange. These lenticels do the same thing. The next thing I want you to know is the vascular cambion. So just like I said, cambion is a type of meristematic tissue, which means it's going to produce something. Well, the vascular tissue, guess what it's going to produce? Vascular tissue, which we know are xylem and phloem. So the vascular cambion is the most active layer. It's constantly producing new cells as long as that plant is alive. It's going to constantly produce new xylem and phloem, new vascular tissue, as long as that plant is alive. That's why our trees just keep growing. All right. And so we just talked about how, plants will have this primary growth as they grow taller, and then they have the secondary growth as they grow larger. And we know that if you cut a tree down, you start to see something called an annual ring. Now, during the spring, you're going to have a large amount of xylem being produced because what happens in the spring? We have a lot of rain. Well, these annual rings that you can see whenever you, if you were to cut a tree down and look at its trunk, you're able to see these rings. And I know we've looked at it in class. An annual ring is made up of what's called springwood and summerwood. One is going to be light colored, and that's going to be the springwood. So we say that it's light colored. The summerwood is going to be a little bit darker. Typically, the springwood, that lighter color ring, is going to be larger. The summerwood, the darker color, is going to be a little bit smaller. We're going to have more growth in the spring when there's a lot of water and rain. In the summer, we're not going to have as much growth. But one of the springwood circles plus one of the summerwood circles is going to equal an annual ring, and that'll tell you how old that tree is. All right. Looking at the stems, the pith is just the ground tissue in the middle. That's all it is. The pith is just that packing material. It's that stuff right in the middle. We've talked about this already, how the xylem and phloem, those vascular tissues, are going to be arranged in bundles. And we even looked at this already. We talked about how in a dicot, they are arranged nice and orderly in a ring. And then in a monocot, you've kind of got them scattered throughout, and it kind of looks a mess. All right. And if you feel like I'm going fast or I'm skipping something, if I don't talk about it, I'm not quizzing over it. Remember, we're trying to move through plants so we can get to the animals. All right, let's talk about the roots real quick. The roots are the primary organs for anchoring a plant. Their job is to anchor their plant. Their job is to absorb water and nutrients. And they even have an important role in asexual reproduction. So 3 main functions of the roots, and we looked at that during our lab. So there's 2 types of root systems. I want you to know the taproot system is where you kind of have a large main root, and you might have a little bit of root hairs kind of coming off here and there. But remember, our example was a carrot. The fibrous root system, you're going to have a lot of little roots. It kind of looks like a matted mess underneath the ground. Taproot is typical of a dicot. Fibrous is typical of a monocot. So don't forget that. Again, this is stuff we've gone over quite a bit. We're just finally hitting it in the chapter. Looking at the structure of the roots are covered by an epidermis. They are capable of primary and secondary growth. Of course, for the roots, they're going to be growing down further into the grounds, but then they'll also be able to have this increase in diameter, kind of like other areas of the plants. Now, the roots, the very tip of the root is going to be covered by a root cap. I do want you to know that. I'm not going to make you memorize this diagram like I would in years past, but I want you to know about this root cap, and it's important. Whenever you're playing football, you wear a helmet to protect your head because it's very important. The root cap has an important job because it protects the very end of that root, because that's the part that's going to be digging further into the ground. And if you notice right here, this area is the meristematic region that's full of those stem cells. And so that root cap is there to protect those very sensitive stem cells as that root digs further into the ground. We don't want to damage that very important tissue. Just like when you play football or do anything dangerous that requires a helmet, you don't want to damage your brain. It is important. So, um, I think that's all I wanted to focus on as far as the stem and the roots go.